Welcome, everyone. This is Mark Stoddard. My colleague Jennifer Dixon is on with me. So I would like to welcome our EPA folk. There's several of you, but the main speaker is Michelle Bergin. Michelle is a physical scientist and has been with EPA for 3 years. Michelle received a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering, a master's degree in mechanical engineering, and a doctorate in environmental engineering from Georgia Tech. So perhaps I should say Dr. Bergin. Michelle has over 20 years of experience in engineering and atmospheric policy, with previous experience with the state of Georgia in the Environmental Protection Division. So very impressive credentials, Michelle. So we have adoption and submittal of state plans implement Clean Air Act, Section 111D. Take it away, Michelle.
Thank you. I see you're in Indiana. My son's up there right now.
Oh, yeah, right. I'm in Indianapolis, central Indiana.
Ah, he's in West Lafayette. So.
Oh, yeah, Purdue University. Go
Yeah.
Boilers, I guess.
Yeah, Boilermakers. I love that. I'm going to share slides here and they will be available to you. I know we're allowed to share those, so you don't have to take notes. And I hope that this is going to show the right screen.
And Michelle, while you're getting that squared away, I just want to take a quick opportunity. I apologize that I am not on camera. I'm dealing with some bandwidth issues today. And so staying off camera just so that you all can hear me okay. But again, my name is Tony Jones. I'm an engineer in the Community Travel and Programs group, and I'm here today in Rhonda's absence. And before Michelle gets started, just wanted to quickly kind of set the tone and expectations for today's presentation. Many of you may already be aware that we are in the public comment period for the implementing regulations 111D subpart BA. And so today we're hopeful that you have already attended one of the previous webinars that we've put on regarding subpart BA, but we're going to be very limited in how we can respond and how deep we can get into any questions that are presented today, because the comment period is still open, although it is closing pretty soon here. So Michelle's gonna walk through the presentation. She is correct. We will be happy to share these slides at the end of today's discussion and also open to questions, but just wanted to highlight that because the comment period is open, we are extremely limited to just those clarifying questions that will help you in putting together your written comments, where the agency will be able to dive a little bit deeper into those responses. So Michelle, I see your slide deck is open and ready to go. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. Thanks, Michelle.
Okay, thanks. I wasn't sure if I was sharing the right screen. It seems like every time I use Zoom, it's a little different. But okay, well, thank you for having us here today. We're really glad to get the chance to share the proposal with people. We're hoping to get good feedback in through the comment section. And like Tony said, we know the deadline's soon, but it's still open, and we appreciate input on how this can be a good, solid rule when we get to final. So I'm not sure if we said I'm in the Office of Air Quality Planning and Standards and in the stationary source group, and some other members of our rule team are here today so we can help with questions that we might be able to answer following the presentation. So we recently proposed amendments to EPA's requirements that govern state plans for existing sources. This falls under Clean Air Act Section 111D, and we refer to them as the implementing regulations. Yeah, great. So first, this might be a refresher for you all. I'm not familiar with your group, so we'll give a quick background on what Clean Air Act Section 111D is, the emission guidelines, and what these, the purpose of these implementing regulations are. So first, for Clean Air Act Section 111, this is how the EPA's air program fits in the Clean Air Act. Section 111 directs EPA to use different approaches for controlling emissions of certain pollutants at either new sources or existing stationary sources of air pollution. And these are in specific categories. Each emission guideline is for a specific category, such as oil and gas operations, municipal solid waste landfills, or the power sector. So new sources where facilities aren't built yet are under Clean Air Act Section 111B as in boy. And for those, the EPA sets federal standards that the sources then implement. But for existing sources under Section 111D as in dog, the EPA writes emission guidelines that have presumptive standards, and then states write the plans for their facilities to meet presumptive standards. So there's been several emission guidelines released by the EPA over the years, and you might be familiar with the recent oil and natural gas emission guidelines are the kind of big topic right now. And one important thing to note is emission guidelines can override any requirements in implementing regulations. So these are really a foundational set of provisions for EPAs and states. So this next graphic shows where the implementing regs fit when we're in the Section 111D processes. So after EPA finalizes emission guidelines, the states develop the plans to implement the standards that were established, and then the EPA must review and approve the plan or issue a federal plan. So in that part of the implementing regulations, the result are plans that achieve the emission reductions that are identified under Section 111D in the emission guideline. So basically the implementing regulations, just to summarize, sets the processes and timelines for the development, adoption, and submittal of state plans for existing sources, and for EPA to review the plans and approve them or issue a federal plan. And there's lots of other nuances through this, which I don't know if anybody knows all of them, but we'll go through the basic proposed amendments to these implementing regulations. There's 6 main sections. There's the timing of the state and federal plans, some mechanisms to improve flexibility and efficiency within these processes. We call them regulatory mechanisms. There's new requirements for meaningful engagement to be sure we reach all stakeholders. There's applying a less stringent standard to a source, which is a not much used part of Section 111D, performance standards and compliance flexibilities, and then some general updates, including for electronic submission of state plans. So first, for the timelines, I thought I had a history slide in here, but I think I don't. So our initial timelines were set in 1975, and then in 2019, they were updated, but then vacated. So right now, the implementing regulations do not have timelines. The 2019 ones were much longer than the 1975 ones. So we tried to look at what would be doable for, over a broad range of whatever emission guidelines might be finalized. And we've proposed timelines for each of these processes. So basically, for a state plan, we've proposed 15 months. An EPA completeness determination is 2 months. Then EPA's final action on the state plans, 12 months after a plan is complete. And then another 12 months for the EPA to issue a federal plan if there was no state plan submitted or if a state plan was not approved. And in your slide deck, you'll have a comparison with the original timelines and then the vacated timelines, so you can see where we've tried to balance the court decision. And there's also something called increments of progress for when compliance schedules are far out, so that we have established enforceable steps along the way to make sure we're moving towards those long-term goals. The proposed regulatory mechanisms, I like these. They feel fairly straightforward. And these are used in section 110 for NACS plans. So they've been widely supported. So we hope they'll be supported in this section too. Basically, it's partial approval and disapproval, conditional approval, something called parallel processing, which allows us to move forward with the technical aspects of a plan if things like legislative approval and some meaningful engagement and other outreach processes aren't complete, but that are not anticipated to meaningfully change any of the technical parts of the plan. There's a state plan call similar to a SIP call and an error correction mechanism. The next section is meaningful engagement. The EPA is proposing to require states to identify all pertinent stakeholders and conduct meaningful engagement during plan development. And we'll tell you those two definitions in a second. But basically, this extends the minimum requirements for public notice. For example, if people don't have internet access around the facilities addressed by the emission guideline, then we would want some additional outreach, and also to improve opportunities for participation by addressing potential barriers. For example, if there's a significant language barrier or something like that. And then there's a requirement that states include a demonstration of meaningful engagement as part of the required completeness criteria for a state plan. The definition of meaningful engagement is, I'll just read it, timely engagement with pertinent stakeholder representation in the plan development or plan revision process. Such engagement must not be disproportionate in favor of certain stakeholders. It must include early outreach, sharing information, and soliciting input on the state plan. So those are the steps that are shown in a plan submittal. So pertinent stakeholders are also defined, and this includes, but are not limited to, industry, small businesses, and communities that are most affected by and vulnerable to the impacts of the plan or plan revision. And since this is for existing facilities, that may mean, and depending on the pollutant and impacts, those near those facilities. So in particular, pertinent stakeholders include those who are most affected by and vulnerable to the health or environmental impacts of pollution from the designated facilities addressed by the plan or plan revision. The next section, which you might also hear is referred to as rule-off. These are requirements for applying a less stringent standard to a source. And the Clean Air Act requires the EPA to permit states to apply a different standard to a particular existing source based on that source's remaining useful life and other factors. And the current provisions are fairly vague on what this all means. So we've proposed clarifications and revisions for when and how a state may seek to invoke rule-off in its plan for a specific designated facility or class of facilities, and for how the EPA reviews that submission in a state plan. And we did this to improve regulatory certainty and ensure consistency during planning and approval processes. There's a number of topics in the rule-off section of the proposal. Basically, it's threshold requirements, then how to calculate a less stringent standard, contingency requirements. For example, if it was that it's not operating at full capacity, but then it does change the operating conditions. The remaining useful life of a facility. For example, if it's going to be retired very shortly, depending on how that's defined in the emission guideline. Consideration of impacted communities that would be near the designated facilities that are being, that are applying under this rule-off for a less stringent standard. How the EPA should review state plans that invoke this rule-off provision, and the authority of states to apply more stringent standards if they choose. The next proposed amendment topic is the definition of standard of performance with some minor changes to that definition. And then compliance flexibilities is an EPA clarification. It's a reinterpretation that the EPA can approve state plans that allow sources where appropriate. And again, it depends on the emission guideline to meet performance standards in the aggregate. So that's such as through averaging or trading. We're trying to keep from having confusion around these issues if emission guidelines come out that address these topics. Then we are updating away from hard copy submissions of state plans to electronic copies and using specs, which has been successful in the Section 110 world for SIPs, or because these might be on the books for a long time, a different electronic reporting tool that's provided by the EPA through the emission guideline. So the timing and next steps for this proposal, it was signed on December 14th. And we've been undergoing outreach, and I'm hoping many of you might have heard our previous talks with state groups or the public hearing or training that we've done. But the comment period is open to February 27th. And then we're planning to finalize the rule within this year. And then just so you have it in one place, this will be in your slide deck, the docket ID and the portal address for submitting comments. And this is the rule page with other information and access, to the FR notice. But that's it. So thank you. And if anyone has questions, we will do our best to help answer them.
So, any questions? I don't see anything posted in the chat.
Donovan has his hand up, Mark.
Go ahead, Donovan.
So thank you for that presentation. I had a question on how these proposed changes might impact states that essentially have blanket approval of state plans, at least as far as related to facilities. I know here in Tennessee, we have that strange designation. And I think there is only a single designated facility that we had to get a SIP on.
That's a really great question. And we have asked for comments on those directly because we have not proposed specifically what to do with that. And Nora might have, Nora's from OGC, Nora Greenglass, but we've had that question come up during our engagement and have been discussing what the processes are, what we might be able to do about that.
Okay, thank you. I do think, at least in our standpoint, it does make things work more smoothly, that we can simply just issue the permit rather than going through EPA approval process. But that's just from our standpoint.
Okay, thank you.
And Donovan, this is Tony Jones again. Just wanted to jump in. I'm sure you're preparing written comments, but also just wanted to take that opportunity to plug it again and reemphasize to please submit your situation, the concern, and any suggestions on how the rule should be modified from proposal to final to address that issue in your written comments.
Definitely understood, Tony. I'm sure our air pollution control has been reviewing this in association with our OGC to produce any comments from the state perspective.
Good, good.
So I was just sort of like looking like, is there anything that I maybe need to let them know to make sure that they look at it and send in comments?
Right, absolutely. Thank you.
Anyone else? You have your opportunity. You have the people in the know.
All right, I'll jump in with another question. So it seems the 111B mainly deals with new source performance standards as opposed to the 111D, which based on how it was described is more about the emission guidances, which would potentially fall under the NESHAPs more than anything else. What other broad categories might the two sections apply to?
Well, the NESHAP is a different section. Those are the section 112 rules.
Okay,
So the 111 are not for HAP, and they're not for the criteria pollutants. So the greenhouse gas ones are the most recent one. And if you look at previous ones, they're things like from phosphate fertilizer, there was like fluoride. So they're kind of almost cats and dogs of pollutant emissions, but the greenhouse gases are have fallen under 111D for existing sources. And then the NSPS, the 111B are the new sources.
okay, excellent. Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, we get a lot of confusion too with state plans and SIPs. We just use the different terms to help ourselves, clarify when we're talking about the different programs, but they do have a lot of similarities.
So to clarify, the state plan in this instance, 111D, is not to be confused with the state implementation plan.
That's correct. The state implementation plans that's how we use the terminology. The state implementation plans are the NACs, PM 2.5 and ozone with those. And these are for the 111D pollutants and source categories.
And you gave an example of those being the greenhouse gas emissions, CO2, methane, etc.
Right.